Hello everyone and welcome to the finals of the Grand Chess Tour. It's the London Chess Classic and the four players are now battling it out to see who will take the first place in the Grand Chess Tour. Magnus Carlsen, Maxime, Vachier, Lagrave, Dingliren and Levon Aranan. So here from round one, a nice classical game between Magnus and MVL, and here again we have a bit of a different time format. It's 130 players per player. 130 minutes per player, and you don't get any increment. There's a 30-second delay starting from move 1, and there is no time control where you are awarded additional time, so no additional time at move 40, 60 or whatnot. So you have what you have the 30 seconds delay, and that's it. You will not be awarded any additional time. So it tends to get things a bit more interesting. So that being said, let's check out the game, and as usual when Magnus plays against MVL, we either see, I don't know why, but lately it's either MVL shows how to play the Grunfeld, then Magnus shows how not to play the Grunfeld, or we have a nice Najdorf. So here it's again a nice Najdorf, and it's just all fireworks in round one. So let's check it out. E4 by Magnus with C5. By MVL, the Sicilian defense, knight to f3, d6, and d4. Captures. We have knight c3, knight c3, knight f6, knight c3, and a6. And we have the Najdorf Sicilian on the board. We have bishop to g5, e6, and now f3. Going for the setup you would usually play against a dragon Sicilian, for example. For the idea being queen d2, you want to castle queen side, and you want to start pushing pawns on the king side if black, for example, castles king side. But with h6, bishop back to e3, and now b5 by MVL. Preparing to fianchetto the light square bishop with a3, stopping b4, and knight b to d7 now. With queen to d2, knight to c6, you can play this, but it doesn't really do anything. The queen just moves, and then you have to move the knight back. So queen to d2, preparing to castle queenside, and now bishop to b7. And here there is one game that reached this position where g4 was played. It was a game played between a 1900 player and a 2500 player, where the 1900 player started lounging at the black king. But here Magnus just castles queenside, and it is as of move 11 that we have a completely new game. So here, of course, MVL doesn't want to see a move like g4. So here we have h5, which will make it harder for white to break through on the king side. King b1, always a useful prophylactic move, and bishop to e7 by MVL. We have queen to e1 by Magnus, and now comes rook to c8. Now MVL wants to get the queen to c7 and put some pressure along the c file, whereas if he's able to push d5 and b4, he should get a very nice attack going. So rook to g1 by Magnus, and now queen to c7 as planned. And here Magnus took some 30 minutes to decide what to play here, and he played g3. A slow positional move. In the future he wants to play h3 and g4, but he really wants to get rook to g2 in. That will defend the c2 pawn later on, so you will be able to move this knight, you'll be able to move this knight, you will always have a nice defender of the c2 pawn. So instead of g3, queen g3 might look interesting as it attacks the g7 pawn, but here black would actually encourage you to capture it, and you do not want to capture it. If you capture it, you get rook h7, the queen is under attack. If the queen moves, queen g5, rook h5 attacks the queen again, queen g7 and bishop to f8, f8 just traps the queen. Or rather, it doesn't, since you have knight captures on e6, but still black will be better. Yeah, you either have to give up a piece to get your queen out of the way with queen to g6 check. Black will always be better here, and if just bishop captures on g7, it's a clean piece. Knight captures, rook captures. Okay, you do get the d6 pawn, so you get 2 pawns, but still, black will be better. So Magnus goes for g3, like we said, gave it some 30 minutes think, and here we have knight to e5. Here it's one of those positions, you know how we always say that you should always play d5 in the Sicilian if it's possible. So here this is one such position, and d5 is indeed possible, but it creates so many complications that it's just crazy. It's hard to say if MVL ever had this position on the board, since it's Magnus who came up with the completely new game position. But still, here it would just all hell would break loose. For example, bishop f4 attacks the queen, and now if e5, you have e captures on d5, which creates a completely crazy game. Basically, you cannot capture the knight because the queen hangs, and if you capture the bishop, then you get knight to f5, already threatening mate. And after queen to e5, blocking mate, now d6, and this is just completely wild stuff. Bishop f8, queen captures on e5, knight captures, and now rook to e1 will win back the piece because, well, once the knight is defended, you just play g captures on f4 and win back the piece. So here, white should get the upper hand. The problem is after e captures on d5, this move, you don't have to capture the bishop. You just play knight captures on d5, and you continue the game in a nicely fashion. Knight captures on d5, bishop captures, and now the game continues. Rook g2 will have to be played to keep an eye on this guy here, and then the game continues. But again, it's just a completely crazy position, although it is possible. But MVL prefers knight to e5. He wants to get this knight over to c4. And here Magnus took another 20 minutes to come up with a reply, as there are a lot of interesting ideas. You could play h3 followed by g4. You could try some other ideas. For example, you could try bishop to h3. Okay, it does come with the idea of sacrificing the bishop on e6 followed by knight captures on e6. But it doesn't work. After knight to c4, you could go bishop captures, f captures, and knight capture. Seems like you already grabbed 2 pawns for the piece. You're gonna at least grab another one. The g7 pawn will fall with check. Problem is, black has knight captures on a3 with check. And now, if you don't capture king a1 or king c1, run into queen to a5, or if you capture it, then just queen captures on c3. White loses the attack, and your piece sacrifice was in vain. Queen captures, rook captures. And you don't have knight captures on g7. Okay, with check, king is going to attack the knight, knight to f5, and now, okay, the bishop on e3 is now guarded by the knight, but you're going to bring the rook over here, and you will have an excellent game with black. White has no compensation here. So instead, after knight e5, we have rook to g2 by Magnus, just getting that defender in there. And now comes castles. Here, Maxime took some 10 minutes to think, and he decided to castle and said, okay, it's not a problem. You will not be able to create any sort of an attack on the king side. If someone is attacking, that's going to be me on the queen side. So Magnus plays h3, prepares to start pushing on the king side, but d5. And here Magnus has to decide, does he want to trade, does he want to go bishop to f4, or does he want to keep the position closed? So he wants to keep the position closed and attack on the king side if possible. So he decides on f4, pushes the knight to c4, and now he can either capture on c4 to preserve his bishop, which is possible. The problem is, after bishop captures, now you play d captures on c4. You don't really have a good way of defending your pawn here. So what do you play? If bishop to c1, if you add another defender to the pawn here, just b4 is very strong. And after a captures, bishop captures, it's black who will have a very nice attack. You don't really care about pawns anymore at this point. Black will just have a very, very strong attack here. So after knight to c4, Magnus decided for e5, and now Maxime has to decide whether he wants to go knight e4 or first eliminate the dark square bishop. Both ideas are very much playable, but you know, who could resist such a nice dark square bishop? So MVL grabs it. We have queen captures, and only now knight to e4. We have knight captures by Magnus, d captures on e4, and now comes rook to e2, preparing bishop to g2, and this pawn will not be able to withstand all of the attacks. But MVL says that it's not a problem. Here he goes bishop to d5. The idea is bishop to d5 followed by queen to c4. He wants to threaten the a2 square. Another possibility was rook to d8. It's also very interesting. You just say, okay, I don't care about this pawn. I'm just going to give it up. b4. You start an attack. Pawn captures, bishop captures, and you have all of your pieces are fully mobilized, and you will just have a very pleasant attack on the queen side. But okay, MVL decided for bishop to d5. As he's such a Najdorf expert, it's hard to even imagine how many Najdorf positions and how many ideas in the Najdorf, you know, regarding this type of attack, that type of attack he already had at home when you know, preparing for some nice Najdorf games, but hard to say which are. But he's such a creative player that I'm sure most of it is actually found over the board. But okay, Magnus continues bishop to g2. He has to go for the pawn. There's no other way around it. And now queen to c4, threatening queen to a2 check. And now if you block with the b3, it is possible, but after queen c3, black again gets the upper hand. For example, you do grab your pawn, but bishop captures on e4, queen captures on c3, rook captures, and rook captures on e4. The problem is after rook f to c8, black is perfectly fine. You can grab the a3 pawn, you can grab the g3 pawn, so it doesn't really matter that you are down a pawn at the moment. Black will be better in this position. So after queen c4, Magnus played knight to b3, just blocking it that way. And here we have bishop to c5, a deadly dare for Magnus. Does he want to grab on c5 and allow queen to a2 check? So it's basically a piece sacrifice. And here Magnus doesn't think about it for too long. He just grabs the bishop. And now black could just capture the piece, and then the game just continues. So white will play b3, push the queen back, and the game continues. But MVL wants to attack. So queen to a2 check. We have king to c1. The time on the clock at this point is 40 minutes for Magnus and 1 hour for MVL. We have king to c1, and now comes, well, if you tried rook to queen to a1 check right away, then just king d2 and the king just runs away. If queen captures on b2, king e1, and now if bishop to c4 attacking the rook, just rook e to d2. Everything is nicely protected, the knight is protected, you will capture on e4 on the next move, and the black does not have compensation for the sacrificed piece. So after king to c1, rook f to d8 by MVL, and now, well, if this bishop ever moves, the rook covers the d2 square, queen to a1 can be made. So it's a really unpleasant position for white, and a lot of ideas are possible here. But you know, it's just one of those positions where you want to pause the video and try to find the best move for Magnus while I give you a couple of seconds. So, you know, you can do that. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding an incredibly difficult move to find, but it's completely counterintuitive, but it really just saves white. So first we're going to show an idea that what happens after bishop captures on e4. The idea is possible, but then you have queen a1 check, king to d2, and now bishop captures on e4 with a discovery from the rook. Knight to d3 blocking, and now queen captures on b2. This is an extremely hard move to find, not at this position, but when you start the variation. Because, okay, you cannot capture due to the rook, but you give up the bishop on e4. Point is, after queen captures, you have rook to c4, push the queen back, and after queen to f3, queen to c3 check. And now king e3, you can just go king d4 check, king here, queen to c3 check, king e3, queen d4 check, you go back, and it's a draw by repetition of moves. So really insane stuff. If you try to hide with king to c1, just rook a4 captures, and it's mate or severe material loss. So white will have to settle for a draw here. So bishop captures is a playable move, but it's basically a forced draw if played to perfection. So here, the move you had to find was c4, and it's just, like I said, an incredible counterintuitive move, because you basically open up even more lines in front of your king, and there are two rooks, and there's a rook on c8 and on d8, really just ready to crush the white king. The problem is, it really creates problems for black, because just b captures and c4 closes the c file, and you don't want to close your c file for the rook. On the other hand, if you don't do it, you cannot move the bishop. If you move the bishop, just rook captures rook, and white is able to trade down all of the pieces. Or if you just capture here, it doesn't matter. Rook captures, and then rook to d2. You offer trades, and if queen to a1 check, king to c2, it's not a problem. Rook captures, queen captures, and again, you do not have compensation for the sacrificed piece. Black has no ways of continuing this attack. So that will not do. So after c4, let's say queen captures on c4 with check. Again, rook to c2 now. Defends against check, adds another defender to the knight, so it's not a problem. If queen back to a2, just rook to d4, and you've created an escape route for the king. Now if queen to a1, you can start running away, and everything is nicely protected. So here, after c4, b captures on c4 was played by Maxime. And well, now you've basically closed off the c file for your rook, and now Magnus has a safety square on c2 for the king. So here Magnus plays rook e to d2, adds another attacker on the d file. Now if the bishop moves, you can just create madness here on the d file. There was also the possibility, and I'm just going to show it because it's a really insane engine line that starts with knight to a4. The point is you want to bring the knight back to c3 to use it for defense. Problem is there's a bishop to c6, attacks the knight. Now you trade a pair of rooks, captures, and then now knight to c3. With an attack on the queen, queen a1 check, and now you have to block with the knight. If you go king to c2, then bishop to a4 wins for black. Knight captures, queen d2, queen d1 check, king has to move, and queen to b3 will be mate. So after queen to a1 check, you have to block with the knight, and now you get rook to d3, and it's just, again, a really disgusting position. Queen to g1, you have to move, and now, well, it's really complicated, but white should have the upper hand. So this was one of the ways to go. For example, if c3, you can just go queen to e1. You add another defender to the c3 pawn. The problem is if you capture here, rook just captures, and the black queen will never ever play a move in this game, since there's no way to bring the queen out. It's just out of the game. So definitely a very interesting idea, this knight to a4, but extremely complicated, and well, there's simply too much at stake to go into something if you cannot calculate it all the way, and also if you don't want to invest too much time in calculating it, since there are no additions in time in this tournament. So here rook e to d2 by Magnus, and here we have queen to a1 check. We have king to c2 by Magnus, and now MVL just repeats queen to a2. He wants the queen and king on this file, as now c3 will be a pretty big deal, since you will not be able to recapture with the b pawn. And here we just have king to c1. The problem is if you try something like rook to c1 to try running away with your king, here c3 is just deadly. Point is that after queen captures on c3, you play bishop to b3. Now this comes with check. And after queen captures on b3, well, now you just play rook captures on c5. After the king moves, you win the queen. So that's not a great idea. But you could play knight captures on b3, and then you have just rook captures on c3 with check. King captures on c3, and now rook c8 check. King d4, and now rook captures on c1. Knight captures on c1, attacking the queen, but you are able to wiggle out because you have queen to d5 check, king to e3, and now queen to c5 check finally picks up the knight, and here you will regain material advantage. King captures on e4, now just queen captures on c1, and now of course the queen will win against the rook and the bishop, most likely. But with such strong players playing this tournament, probably yes. So you can do something like rook to c1. If you try bishop captures on e4, then just rook captures on c5 is enough to win. If queen captures, then you just play bishop captures on e4 with check, and everything falls apart. If you go back, king c1, then queen a1 is mate. So your only other option is to block here with the rook, but here you just gobble up everything. C captures on d3 with check, king moves, you push the pawn, and now you just win the game. So after queen to a2, Magnus really doesn't have a good move. He's up a piece. He is not in any obvious danger, but he is. c3 is a terrible threat. So here he just repeats king to c1, and we have just queen to a1 check. King goes back, queen to a2, and after king to c1. It was in this position that the players agreed to a draw. Here, you might think, okay, well, why not just c3? It must work. Well, it doesn't, because here the queen can just capture, and it's not a problem because there's no bishop to b3 to come with check. So here you don't really have a good way of continuing the attack. If queen a1 check, the king just moves to c2, and there's no continuation. Now, if the queen goes here, it doesn't really do anything, as you have this very, very, very cool resource of bishop to f1, and now black just black no longer has the attack. Now, if bishop to b3 check, which is what you want to do, you have knight captures on b3, Rook captures on c3 with check, yes, you win the queen, and now you get king captures on c3, rook captures here, and just knight captures, and well, now the black queen will not be able to play this against a rook, knight, and the bishop, but white will definitely win this game. So yeah, after this king to c1, the players agreed to a draw, and well, what a very nice start of the London Chess Classic, the finals of the Grand Chess Tour. So I haven't checked on this game just finished, so I haven't checked out on the Ding versus Levon, since their game finished quite earlier, but we're gonna check out that game tomorrow as well, unless it's like a really big snooze fest, then we're not. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Doug McNabb, Gabi Astonite, Jeff Graves, and Pablo Mohan for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Grand Chess Tour. It's quite a big event, so I do plan to cover it. Checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and after that, we are starting the next big saga. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.